The Cato Institute.
The Cato Institute.
The Cato Institute.
Cato Institute.
The Cato Institute.
It's possible that if the Republicans had been in power the last couple of years, they wouldn't have spent as much money as the Democrats, although looking at the Bush years, you can't be sure of that. But once the Democrats ratchet spending up to this level, you're not seeing Republicans talking about actually reducing spending. They talk about reducing the growth of spending, and we've got to get spending under control. But spending has doubled. Annual federal spending has doubled in 10 years, and nobody's saying, are we getting more for our money than we did 10 years ago?
The U.S. has an unsustainable situation. Our debt is growing much too fast, and so unless we make significant adjustments, and it doesn't seem as though we're going to, based on current negotiations, our debt is gradually going to be more and more risky, and at some point it's going to default. So people are right to already be downgrading it.
The problem in Europe is for Europe to solve. The Fed can't fix the European problem. Neither can the United States government. All we can do is be essentially bystanders on that play that's
well, we do have
coming
to be
out.
prepared to act, though, because you don't want to see a Lehman-type freeze-up. And if you did get one, certainly if you got an Italy or Spain to default, Greece you might be able to contain. But if you had an Italy or Spain default, you are looking about a Lehman-type freeze-up there, and the Fed has to be prepared to respond to that very aggressively.
But what is it that the Fed is supposed to do? Is the Fed supposed to buy Greek bonds? I think that's a nutty idea. Nobody would propose that.
The growth in entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, frankly, are squeezing out a lot of other activities of the federal government. Eventually, we're going to have to take on some of these federal departments and downsize them simply because the entitlements are costing so much.
One thing I want to make clear about this whole foreign aid debate is that it's becoming increasingly evident that aid simply doesn't respond to the needs of poor people in developing countries.
Malou Innocent is an expert of foreign policy at the Cato Institute. She doesn't think more foreign money in Afghanistan will have a positive impact.
Up until about 3 years ago, the Ministry of Finance didn't know where 80% of their money was going. So, I mean, these are sort of critical issues of not simply just money, but just in terms of core competency, how they're efficiently using the money that's already being given.
Well, there's no silver bullet, and I think people right, left, center, whatever your dovish, hawkish predilection, people talk about the military option or people talk about containing and deterring a nuclear Iran. The net takeaway, I think, here, if you read the IAEA report carefully, particularly paragraphs 52 and 53, they indicate, I think, that this business of being on the brink of developing a nuclear weapon is overstated. So it's not much consolation to say that we're talking about a few years rather than a few months, but I don't think that we have a very good card to play today.
The non-defense side of government also gets an 8 to 9% cut. Some call that catastrophic. Dan Mitchell from the Cato Institute, he says something else.
If there's no deal, taxpayers actually win because we get a sequester, and that means in Washington budget talk there are automatic reductions in the projected growth of government spending.
His green policy last night was like stepping on, let's keep with cars here, like stepping on the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. He's talking about exploiting natural gas, and we have a lot of that, and that's a very, very good thing. What that's going to do is produce power and move vehicles very efficiently, and it's going to make the other technologies that he wants to push, solar energy and windmills, even more inefficient, even more relatively expensive than they are now. Those solar panels, solar voltaic is the most inefficient way to produce electricity on the planet.
All we're talking about is people bearing the cost of their own decisions. We know that a large portion of the cost of health care is due to lifestyle. People who overeat and become obese, people who smoke, people who drink too much. There's a lot of decisions that people make that add to the cost of health care for all of us. And asking them to bear some small portion of that cost themselves is not a big deal. And we can certainly find ways to exempt people whose problem is not due to any lifestyle decision. But for people who simply choose to eat too much, why should I pay for it? Why shouldn't they?
Part of the problem that we have with the way trade is being sold is that the proponents of free trade will say these agreements will create X thousand jobs, and then of course the opponents of these deals have their own models and they say no, it will destroy this number of jobs. And instead of focusing on numbers, which in my opinion are very, very difficult, if not impossible to judge in advance, we should be talking about the fact that yes, some jobs are destroyed, but others are created. These agreements will create better jobs.
You hear opinion leaders saying we need to get tougher with the Chinese, or worse,
We need to emulate the Chinese. We need to adopt some top-down industrial policy in the United States that plays totally against the strengths that we have here. And we have a culture of dissent. We encourage dissent, and that is the key ingredient to innovation. The Chinese don't allow dissent. That's why they can't innovate. That's why they steal intellectual property, and that's why they force in these indigenous innovation policies. So we should not be emulating the Chinese. We should do what we do and get back to what we do and do it better, right? We've dropped the ball. Our own policies need to change, and we've got to stop blaming others for our problems.